Welcome to the New York Now podcast, a modern wholesale market for retailers and specialty buyers seeking diversity and discovery. Gathering twice a year in America's design capital, New York City, it's where buyers and designers unearth a refreshed and dedicated collection of eclectic lifestyle products.
Hello, New York Now podcast listeners. My name is Amy Lowenberg, and I am the Relations and Partnership Development Manager for New York Now. Today's conversation is with both Michael Aram and David Lindberg, and will focus on the story of a legacy brand. We will see how his brand developed as we hear about Michael's path from the past to the present and take a look into the future. And all throughout this conversation, we will hear the most colorful and passionate stories on how Michael's pieces are created from the inception to the outcome. Michael Aram is an award-winning American Armenian artist who has dedicated his career to craft-based design. Inspired by a trip to India at age 25, he established a second home and studio there, where over 200 artisans, who continue to work alongside him today, share the same creative artist to artisan interactions and remain the source of every object that Michael makes. Nature is Michael's biggest muse, as is the handmade process. Trained as a painter, sculptor, and art historian, Michael has neatly applied his diverse background to the decorative arts. His work encompasses a wide range of media and reveals a rich and vibrant source of inspiration: nature, mythology, narrative storytelling, and purified form. His work combines the imperfections innate in the handmade process with the perfectly imperfect beauty of nature to create objects that reflect humanity. Michael's work is a celebration of craft and age-old handworking traditions. It is the enduring fusion of these ideals, originality, narrative, and craftsmanship, that has become a hallmark of this gifted artist. Situated in the heart of Chelsea, the Michael Aram New York City flagship store is a testament to the brand. The converted store now holds the full line of collections, and visitors might even bump into Michael himself, as he's often known to help customers find their perfect piece. David Lindberg is the Vice President of Marketing for Michael Aram, and over the last 2 years, he's been leading the digital transformation for the brand. Before joining the Michael Aram team, David was head of global marketing in the e-commerce industry, both on the consumer side and in the B2B and SaaS space. As an experienced leader, David has a proven track record of developing new ecosystems and leading the transformation online retail experience for both domestic and global brands. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the New York Now Digital Talks.
Pleased to be here with you.
It's really wonderful to be speaking with you both today. But before we dive into your company history and future, let's take a few minutes to share the connection that Michael Aram has with New York Now. Why don't you tell the story of how our relationship evolved?
Well, my company literally is as old as my participation in the show. I had my first booth at New York Now now I sound like a really old man, in 1989, which is true. It was, I think, January 89 when I participated in the show at that point. I think it was the first year of Accent on Design. But I had a small table in a multi-line booth with other designers in Accent on Design. And it was just such an incredibly exhilarating moment for me personally. And I think also for design at that point in New York, having such a amalgamation of talent and energy at that show. It was really, truly what launched my career.
That's wonderful. Stories like that just warm my heart. Let's jump in. Michael, why don't you tell us about your trip to India at 25 years old and how that helped to shape the direction of your life?
It was a funny moment for me. I went to India to visit friends. I was working at that point at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and decided I would take some time and take an extended trip. So I went to India for, I think, a month. And the idea for me was just to visit friends and to sort of experience the culture. And, part of what I love to do when I travel places is to just get lost and to, become part of that place in my own way. And the friends I was staying with were working in Delhi. And so during the day, I would just get lost. I would go to the old city, which was a place at that point when all of my New Delhi friends would sort of scoff and say, "Oh, but it's so dirty. You can't take your car into the old city. What are you doing?" But for me, it was so fascinating because it really was like turning the clock back hundreds of years ago. This was a really sort of incredible medieval part of the city with incredible architecture. You could get by on foot or on rickshaw, but again, the lanes were too narrow to get a car into. And while I was sort of just wandering through the old city, I sort of fell upon what I thought at that point was sort of a hidden world of craft. Having worked at the museum before the trip, I had great appreciation for the printing arts and for paper and for hand bound books. And one of the things that really touched me was seeing these incredible artisans just hand stitching books together, or printers who were using hot metal typography and setting the type by hand. Some of the hot metal type were back from colonial British times and had names like ballroom and just really fantastic archival designs there. All the different markets of the old city each had their own thing. So there was the paper market, the perfume market, the hand-bound book area. There was the metals market. There were all the different lanes, each sort of focusing on one different thing. And because working in metal was so new for me. I had studied as a fine artist, and of course, living in New York City, studying fine art in America, you're sort of automatically sort of driven towards working, on paper or working on canvas, painting, drawing, all the things that you can do sort of either on a budget or in a New York City apartment without creating too much ruckus or spending, incredibly huge amounts of money doing, were suddenly, right in front of me. There were these metal forgers, just working on the roadside. There were casting foundries just there, sort of down the lane. And so sort of seeing all of that metal work for me was really exciting. It was always something that I felt was sort of out of reach, as an artist living in New York City. So I was immediately drawn to the metal artisans and would just spend days watching them, taking notes, sort of what I would call now, craft observation. But really, it was just a fascination more than even just a scientific observation. I was just completely in awe of these incredibly skilled artisans, and even more touched by the fact that they were working in incredibly humble conditions, without any of the airs of their skill, that their skills would demand. You know what I'm saying? The only people I knew who made things in America were other artists. Everybody's so sort of aware of their work and aware of the value of their work, or sort of looking at it in a very lofty way. And here were these incredibly skilled artisans making unbelievable work in the most humble and beautiful of ways. It was very touching for me. I immediately felt drawn to understanding their process, to learning from them, and ideally, working alongside of them.
That's incredible. I can hear the passion in your voice.
It was crazy. I mean, like when I think back, like all the sort of laughable stories of lack of communication, lack of skills in terms of language for me, it was really laughable. I wish I had video footage of me in those old days with my hair down to my shoulders, parted in the middle, baseball cap, shorts. Really just like the prototypical American guy. Walking down these streets, where people held this sort of fascination for this foreigner, like, who are you? For them to interact with someone from the outside like that was so different for them, and of course their world was different for me. So it was really fascinating. People used to touch me, and they were fascinated because I used to wear my hair parted in the middle, which I didn't realize is only a thing that Indian women do. So they were just completely amazed. What's this guy doing with this long hair parted in the middle? And then, for me, the lack of ability to communicate, to speak in their language, really created so many amazing interactions. And it was phenomenal for me. Really an unbelievable moment in my life.
It sounds absolutely awe-inspiring, and it's pretty amazing how we communicate with each other when we don't speak the same language.
Right. I was arrested by the Delhi police early on because I was working with this incredible craftsman who we still work with now, Mohammed Idris, and he was making cutting dies for the soles of shoes, which are very technical, but he was making them alone in his workshop, which was no wider than his shoulders, with his hand bellows. And then once the fire was going, he'd put the iron in, heat it up, pull it out, forge it, repeat, bellows, forge, repeat. And I was really touched by the fact that here was this guy working again with nothing, bare feet, by the fire, and yet making this incredibly complex, highly specific industrial component, really. And I had just come to New York. The Cooper Hewitt in New York had just had an exhibition on Alexander Calder's work before I had left New York. And I was really inspired by Calder's metal work as well, and decided I would design a shoehorn with a very twisted, curly handle, reminiscent of Alexander Calder's work. And, for me, the fact that here was this man making a cutting die for the soles of shoes without shoes himself, had my mind going, creating for him. He did for me were letter openers with the same kind of twisted handle. And the Delhi police came by because they thought that I was making daggers and wanted to know who this foreigner was making weapons in Old Delhi. Lots of crazy stories.
It sounds like it. One thing I can tell about you for sure is that you're not a trend follower, but you're a trend maker.
I get kicked out of lecturing at schools. I lectured once at National Fashion Institute of Technology in Delhi. So we work a lot with the students there and bring them into the company as graduate students and interns. And at one point, they made the big mistake of calling me in to lecture at the school. And, there, the teachers taught the students to study trend. Trend was a big part of the design education. And then I walk in and tell the kids that, it's a waste of time. They should never study trends. And studying trends is like reading yesterday's news. Which I think is true. Why would you want to read yesterday's news? Especially as a creative person, you want to sort of, you sort of want to think ahead a little bit. You sort of want to make a statement. You sort of want to be yourself. And I just think trends are so depressing and so unoriginal, and I don't know. I mean, I guess there's part of that, but it definitely seems very down. I don't want to speak disparagingly, but it just seems very down the food chain for me, for design, One of my great moments, we were in Paris, this group of people walked in without badges. And, I was sort of looking at them, wondering who they were. And I went over and I introduced myself. And it was the team from Pantone. And they said, "Oh, Michael, we always look at you." And I was so excited, It's like when people say, "Michael, copper is in, you should make copper pieces." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I just don't feel it. I don't feel it. I'm just not." Or everybody's saying, "Oh, like this is the color that everybody's, looking for." Whatever, silvers or golds or coppers or mixed metals or whatever they are. I don't know. I mean, my whole philosophy is just stay true to try to just stay true to who you are and, speak from within and, don't look at yesterday's news so much.
Well, you pretty much just answered the next question I had for you, and that was about where you find your inspiration and what drives you. And it sounds like you really are just one that is constantly looking ahead and just seeing what resonates with you at the moment and moving in that direction.
I think it's about digging deeper. I know it sounds silly because we're designing nut bowls and paper towel holders, but I think that whatever you design, you have to just sort of dig deep and really feel your life and hear and listen and, try to make pieces that are evocative of you, your background, your culture, your point of view, your, cumulative experiences, whatever it is, but just try to have it authentic. And for me, it's important to just have a connection, why, why that, and if you can't answer the question, why that, then I don't think you should be doing it. I struggle sometimes if I can't find the why to something, And I think people feel it. I know, without sounding like so, whatever, philosophical, I think that, people really feel it. And even if they don't, it's just fun for me, I mean, I can talk about so many things, whether it's growing up in the garden of my childhood, whether it's growing up around my parents' dining table, whether it's crawling around on hand knotted carpets, looking at tree of life motifs or pomegranates, or however it is that sort of creates your eye over the years and creates your heart and soul over the years, is what you should sort of talk about, and then laugh at things too. My husband and I have 9-year-old twins, and certainly, like, being a father and having that life was so inspirational for me. And I laugh about how I never thought of designing a paper towel holder until the paper towel holder was always in the middle of the dining table, because you were forever grabbing paper towels to clean up the messes. I mean, like, things should have resonance and reason for you, for whatever they are. So that's something I really try to stay very narrow with and always stay true to. I don't just do things because people ask, unless I feel it. It's crazy.
Tell us about what your favorite challenge to conquer is.
Personally, professionally,
however you choose to answer.
That's a tough one. I mean, it's I don't know. It's sort of tough. One of the things I'm thinking about now is just change. Like, how do we evolve? How do we evolve as people? How do we evolve in our businesses? How do we continue to grow? That's one of my great challenges in life always. Like, how do we continue to evolve? I always say, that if you don't grow, you die. We have to grow within ourselves. We have to always try to be better people. We always have to think, nowadays, I'm always challenging myself. How do we think magically? How do we think positively? And there's that, but then there's always that, change is great, you go first. Like, there's a tremendous difficulty in change. So I think there's this incredible opportunity always, and this incredible challenge. Like, yes, let's continue to evolve, whether it's as fathers, whether it's as children, whether it's as partners, whether it's as designers, whether it's as business owners. How do we always look at what's next?
Well, that's actually really great, because we're going to be talking about what comes next for you and Michael Aram in your business as well. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about the present right now, because we know that you had your first studio in India, and we know that you've got your beautiful New York City showroom in Chelsea. How about just a little bit on that path from one studio to another?
Sure. Well, when I first got to India, I was first working out of my bedroom, of course, like we all do when we start our businesses. And then my first employee was a driver, because I was going to the old city every day in rickshaws, and the rickshaws would refuse to drop me off back home at night. So I figured I needed a car. So I got a car and I got a driver. That was the two of us. And as I started to bring people into the company, I had a really amazing, like, old, I don't know what I'll call it, almost like a stable. It was like, there was, like, where there'd be cows. Maybe it was an old house or something, but it was in one of the old cities of Delhi called Shopwood, which is now very trendy there. But in the old days, it was really a village within the city. And that's where my first studio was. It was incredible. I thought it was incredibly romantic and beautiful. And over the years in India, we kept moving as the needs of our business changed, and unfortunately we had to move out of that kind of village workshop structure and now are in a really beautiful workshop outside of the city, where we have a much larger team and a much more professional infrastructure. But those early days were amazing. I mean, just amazing. I mean, it was really so romantic. At the end of the day, walking down the village lane, and it would be you and the villagers and the cows, and everyone's done a great job that day at work. And it was just really amazing. Beautiful moments and memories back then. And our first New York office was in Hoboken, New Jersey. I had found a place. This is a crazy story, but I had found a place before I went to India, when I thought that I was just going to be a fine artist, and I was living in Greenwich Village, needed space. I had a tiny little studio in the village, and I had decided that I needed a loft to work in as a fine artist. So I had friends who lived in Jersey City, and had been over there, and had taken the PATH train from Christopher Street, where I lived, to Hoboken, and met with a realtor and asked her if there were any lofts for rent that I could use as an artist. And she said, "What's a loft?" This was 1988, and showed me someplace which had been Frank Sinatra's aunt's furniture factory, or furniture showroom. And Patsy, the landlord, had wanted $1,000 for the 5,000 square feet. And I figured out that I could only afford $800, so I offered him $800, and he said no. And then I went to India and ended up doing what I do now. Went back the following year to Hoboken. I wonder if that place, that Frank Sinatra's aunt's furniture showroom, is still available. I went, and I couldn't remember where it was, so I was walking up and down the streets, and finally sort of gave up and thought I'd have coffee, on the corner. And while I was having my coffee, I looked across the street, and that was the building across the street. Went up, Patsy was still there. And I said to Patsy, "What's the rent?" And he said, $800. So I always laugh. Had it not been for those $200, I would have never gone to India and done what I do. I would have just stayed. Wow. Worked as an artist in Hoboken. But that was so I rented that place, and had my office in New York there for a while, and of course have moved, I think, 5 times since then in the last 31 years, to now recently in North Carolina, where we have our warehouse and logistics centered at this point.
Definitely have expanded since those early days.
Well, it's funny because every time, Amy, that I've ever expanded, I sort of tell myself, like, okay, now this is it. This is the last time we're going to have to move. This will take us
until you find the need to do it again.
Yeah, so now we're in a really amazing facility in Goldsboro, North Carolina, which is an amazing town, and have really enjoyed being there as well now.
Well, I can definitely make mention of your Chelsea showroom, because I've been in it myself and probably have drooled just a little bit on your fixtures, just because it's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, with that space, that was our first retail store, and I just love that space because it's a historic building, and I love preservation, and I love historic architecture, and so I love the fact that it has a history to it. When we got the building, it was the only retail store on the street. It was all plumbing supplies up and down the street. And, at that point, we had a showroom at 225 Fifth Avenue. Mm-hmm. And I was living in Greenwich Village and India, back and forth. But my New York home was in Greenwich Village. And I used to love walking to 225 Fifth Avenue to go to work. And then when they moved that up to 34th Street, I thought, no, I just can't do that. So we ended up moving to 18th Street, which was really great. And it was sort of like, okay, here's our office upstairs. We have this showroom downstairs. Oh, well, let's just open it up to the public. Let's just make it a store, And it was just wonderful because I could sit upstairs in my office, which was right above the cash register, and literally hear people's conversations when they were shopping downstairs, which was so incredible for me, because you'd hear people really talk about your work as you're creating work. It was really
Absolutely.
the shop above the store kind of thing. And my joke was, of course, they can't hear me, haha, but I can hear them. So we'd all be talking about our work, and then I could hear the customers downstairs. And we created this glass box, which we ended up having to remove, but it was a glass sort of, I don't know what to call it. It was sort of like a glass terrarium that cut right through the ceiling down to the store. So when we walked past it, I could look down and see the customers, and they could look up to the studio to also understand that this was the home for the brand, that it wasn't just a shop they were in, but they were really connected to the making.
Well, you made an experience. You made it interactive.
It really was. And I always made a point, we have a side entrance that went right up to the office, but I always made a point of walking through the store every single time I came in. Why? Because, number one, I have such love and respect for our customers and just for the retail experience overall, and I love to feel that connection to the end consumer. And I also love to feel that connection to the retail experience. I think it's so important not to work in an ivory tower. And I think, not to sort of be critical of other designers, but I think many of us, can get caught in the trap of working in a very isolated way that potentially risks being out of touch with the consumer, or the shopkeeper. And I think it's really valuable for me to understand. And whenever I talk to our retail customers, I always, of course, thank them for their commitment to our brand. But I always tell them, what I do gives me such joy and gives me such pleasure, and that I can do it every single day. But I know, as much fun as it is to create something, it's really hard to sell, like to be on the floor, to have a customer, to forever tell the stories, forever trying to inspire, it's just not easy. Making is so much fun. When it turns around to selling it, it's not easy,
Well, there's an art to everything.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. And a passion for it too, I think. It's all about connection. You have to feel connected.
It is all about connection. I 100% agree with you. And to every element, I think building your brand and exposing your customer to everything about your brand only just brings them in and makes a part of the family.
I was saying, when you talk about connection, the success that we hear from our retailers is how, they connect with their customers, and they become like family to their customers. And I think that's that relationship, which is so critical.
It is. And that's why the story is so important. The history is so important. And everything that you speak of, past, present, we're now moving into the future. And how do we continue that communication? And how do we continue the story in its new, in this new world, which we're in, which is really just a great segue for David, because we're going to bring you into the conversation now. I feel like this is a great question directly for you. The conversation of virtual reality and augmented reality are becoming far more prevalent in our lives now. And you've made some exciting advancements for your consumer experiences. So tell us about them and tell us what you're doing to expand upon your physical showroom to include into the digital realm.
Yeah, Amy, so this year was a big year for us. So Michael released 4 very large sculptures that were very personal to him. And, before COVID hit, we had these pieces that were sitting either at Michael's house or were sitting in our flagship stores, and they were absolutely beautiful. And as we all got relegated to our homes, we started to fight with how do we get these in front of people, with people not visiting the store any longer? How can we bring that experience to them? So this year we made the investment into augmented reality, and we now offer our large sculptures in what are called physically based renderings. And what that means is now a customer can go onto our website or any of our collateral and use their cell phone to actually see that large sculpture in their home in their space, in their backyard, to be able to experience it. And for us, it was a big moment. Michael talks about his flagship stores and his studio and his art. And one of the hardest things that we deal with in the digital realm is you can't convey that texture, that feeling, that emotional connection that you get through your hands when you're holding a piece. And so, we're constantly looking at technology to how we can maybe get to that point, how we can better help customers with their decision. And, in truth, everybody has seen different technology come out. And virtual reality has been around for a long time, but it's not really been accessible. And we've seen it really, so most people probably don't know, virtual reality goes back to the 80s. And it was with, they were doing research on it. They knew that the computer programming was there. And Cornell started to look into this. It took them 15 years in researching what they could do with virtual reality to be able to even write a paper on that. But you go to today and you see it everywhere. You see it in Snapchat, you see it on Instagram. You see companies like Warby Parker, they're all using some type of virtual reality. But what's been really big for us as a brand is that technology evolves so fast. What has changed for us is that now you no longer need to have a secondary device to be able to experience these pieces. And so the thing that really kind of changed for us is that in 2018, Apple released a native technology where the customer can just use their camera. They don't have to have an app. They don't have to have any additional, equipment, but they can use their native phone to actually use this augmented reality to be able to experience it, whether, it's in their home, it's on their face, it's to send goofy gifts to their friends and family. And that for us is really kind of what was the monumental change. It was the perfect timing, at least it was for us.
So what are some of the keys to success when communicating with the public with this platform?
Yeah, and the big thing that we always talk about in the digital space is about how do we remove hurdles? Because there's plenty of technology out there that's going to allow us to communicate with customers, offer a new experience. But as soon as you have to add something to that pipeline, so as soon as you have to have someone download a new app, as soon as someone has to go to a new page, or they have to do something that they're not comfortable doing, they drop off. And so for us, what the big change was is when Apple started natively supporting augmented reality, we no longer had to go through these extra steps. For the customer, they don't have to understand really technology at all. It's a matter of point your phone at it and to be able to enjoy it. And that's the biggest thing we always work for in the digital realm is how do we keep people focused on the product, not on the technology? And that's been the big thing. And now, when we're talking to customers, especially people who are into pieces like Michael's, where, they're collectors, they're art admirers, they're not going to be, the most tech savvy. So being able to pull out their iPhone, pull and hit that QR code, and then immediately throw it up onto, their backyard. I mean, I had sent Michael just for fun when we were going through our development process. I sent him the link and he pulls it up on his phone, and his son Thaddeus grabs his phone and starts putting the sculpture in different parts of the house, puts it in the pool, puts it in the hallway. And it became this experience where it was beyond the artwork. It was also a moment to connect, to be able to connect generations, but also appreciate the art of what was created.
I love it. I love it. How long did it take for you to implement this?
So that's kind of the nice thing about today is that, years ago, for someone to come in to create a augmented reality model, it would take months. And there are people that specialize in this. And I think a good example for your listeners to understand, it's like watching a movie from 20 years ago, the after effects, and that today you can see it, you know what it is. And it took an entire company to just do that FX. But today, it takes a tenth of the time. So we are fortunate in that there are agencies now that actually have freelance 3D modelers. So just like how Michael is an artist where he's physically, creating these beautiful pieces with his hands and welding and sculpting and bending, there's these same artists that live in the digital realm. And so what we do is we work with a group of freelancers, and we send them a bunch of our dimensions, specs, details that we use a lot of times for shipping or for copywriting. And then we send a ton of reference photos. And these 3D artists are able to take what we provided from a digital and a flat space, and they turn it into a 3D rendering. And so, you think about this, and, Michael takes weeks and months to develop these things. The crazy part about with augmented reality is they turn these around in 3 to 5 days.
Wow.
And it really, it's remarkable. And when we get them back, most of our models are about 90% done. The biggest thing that we typically get into is, do the surfaces feel right? Are they, one of the cool things that has evolved recently with augmented reality is that it now knows where the light source is coming from. And that's one of the big things, and especially as a metal brand. Before coming into COVID, one of the things we did as a brand, we really invested in how we do photography. And we said, not only do we need to revitalize our standard, but we need to start photographing like an artist. It's more than just take a picture of a piece. We need to communicate that narrative that Michael's put his heart and soul into other photos so that the buyer feels it. They get that emotional connection, even if it's through a cell phone or through their computer.
That's incredible. I mean,
the great thing.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and that's where the change has happened with virtual reality and with augmented reality. Before, it looked fake. And I go back to, you watch the old Toy Story movies, they look terrible now. But you watch new animations and they look almost just purely real. And it's because they figured out how to model the light source. And as a metal brand, that's huge, because every one of our pieces comes to life like jewelry as it reflects the room, the shadows, what's in the environment. And now they're able to do that very thing with augmented reality. It's more than just putting it in the room. You can see how your lights in your room and your shadows portray that piece, and you see the scale. I mean, it really is phenomenal, and for me, it's a big thing because, when I came to the brand, the first thing that Michael did is he brought me to the showrooms, and every single piece he walks me through, and he talks about the artistic feel, and you're holding it and touching it. You're speaking with the people on the floor, not only about the piece, but about the customers who come in. And the hard part about the digital realm is it's almost kind of like a masked customer. You don't know who they are or what they feel. But this gives the first chance for them to say, I love this piece, but would it fit in my home? And now they can throw it into their foyer, where they can throw it by their pool or throw it into the backyard. And they can say, not only do I love Michael, this piece fits my home. I don't need to have it, go to the flagship store to see it, or to go to one of Michael's retail partners to see it. They're able to do it. But the other thing too that's so phenomenal about this technology is I go back to hurdles. Before, you had to have an app, you had to have extra software, hardware. Today, anyone with a cell phone can see it and use it. And that's powerful for our retail partners, because now my beautiful showrooms that are in Dallas with one of my premier independent partners can pull that up and show it to their client that they have a personal relationship with and see that piece, because there's only 30 of these sculptures. And so not everyone's going to get the chance to have it, but why not be able to present that to the buyer? So that the technology for us has made that leaps and bounds. that now we're able to connect with customers in a whole new way that 6 months ago, every retailer was never even on their radar. So funny enough, one of the things that had happened is that we had launched with the augmented reality with the large sculptures. And we put in place some additional things for concierge service to be able to help out customers that normally would have gotten to go to one of our stores. What we had is we had an inquiry come through, and it was a customer that was living overseas, and she had used the augmented reality to place the piece into her house, and she loved it. She had to have it. And as she was going through it, not only are you able to see the actual scale of the piece, but you're also able to scale it bigger or smaller, because maybe you have a massive home and you need it bigger. And she reached out to us. We went back and forth with her. And because she was able to see that virtual piece in her house, she ended up buying it like that. What normally would have been an impossible sale for us, to go to an overseas account where very difficult to get a piece, to even see, she was able to do that because she had this mechanism that was not available to her before.
Well, you crossed from digital to physical, even though it wasn't purely there, physically there. She could almost feel it. She could see it. She could feel its weight. She could see its reflection. She could physically feel it in her house. You made it emotional.
It is, and that's the biggest thing, and that's the biggest challenge that we always face in the digital world is, how do we get as close as we can to the real thing? And that's tough, because when you hold a piece of Michael Aram or you're looking at these sculptures, it's profound, it's different. You can't put a price on it. But the closer that we can get that buyer to that experience, the better that we're doing. And that's our kind of constant goal that we're trying to do, is to give the buyers that experience, so that they're so hooked, they're so invested in this piece from an emotional perspective, that when they finally do get to see it, it's exactly everything they ever wanted, and the decision's already been made.
Well, I mean, the one good thing is that there's already a trust factor with your product, with your art, Michael. Like we know the value of it. We know the quality of it. So the development of this is just supporting your brand that much more. I'm really interested in talking about the future now. Like, how do you see this supporting the future of Michael Aram, and what's next? What's next for AR?
So for us, the next evolution that we are expanding into is, one of our popular categories is furniture and lighting. For instance, one of our hottest products is our cocoon pendants. They're absolutely beautiful. They're part of our Butterfly Ginkgo collection. One of the hard parts is that because they're handmade and they are limited in the batches that come out, by the time we get stock in, we're already many units back ordered because so many people want them. And so for us, what we are trying to do is, how can we now bring lighting? How can we put that into someone's home so they can see whether a pendant, a sconce, a table lamp, a floor lamp would fit in that space, so that when the time comes and that inventory is available, they can make the decision quickly. There's no guessing. The same thing with furniture. As we all know, we all live in houses that have different spaces, different sizes, different motifs. And with furniture, it's a tough decision, because you're buying a big statement. And so for us, the investment into the furniture is going to be able to lower that hurdle, to remove that speed bump, so that customers are more confident in that purchase, that they don't have to visit, a flagship store. They can go and purchase it from one of our retail partners, or go online to purchase it, because they've already seen it in their space. They know what they want.
So you made mention to this before, but we are in a rapidly evolving time. And so how are you going to deal with the continued changes and technology advancements?
Yeah, technology is a beast.
Yeah.
I think we all, and even as someone who, I've specialized this my entire career, I am absolutely amazed at the advancements in technology. technology. When I got into this, I was coding for social media, and to see what I had developed 10 years ago to what now is available to the end consumer is phenomenal. I never would have thought in a million years. Even what our cell phones are able to do. So for us, as we look to the future, we're trying to look at how we can blur the lines between the digital realm and the physical realm. For me, a real showroom is everything. I love touching the product. I love being in a showroom because it's the experience. It's one thing to see a piece. It's another thing to see it through the lens of the artist. And so when you visit, one of our retail partners, you visit New York Now to our booth, or you come to our flagship store, when you walk into Michael's vision. You see more than just the piece and how it's used. You see where the heart came from. You see where the passion came from. So, as we evolve, as we look to the future, the reality is that a lot of people might not necessarily go out to a physical showroom anymore or go to a booth. And so how can we bring that experience to them digitally? And so now what we're looking into is how can we do virtual reality with our showrooms instead of having a physical flagship store experience where you walk through and you see the pieces, you immerse yourself in the brand. How can we bring that to an online experience for that customer, whether they just don't feel comfortable maybe going to the store, or maybe they live thousands of miles away and they don't have that opportunity. And we see a lot of brands that are doing it now.
Yes.
But the difference is that up until recently, that technology was very expensive. And that's always kind of the hard part, right? Is that, as brands, we always look to what's Crate and Barrel doing? What's, Warby Parker doing? But they're billion-dollar companies. They have massive budgets to invest into new technology. The nice thing is that because technology is evolving so quickly, smaller brands, the design houses, the retailers, the buyers, it's accessible now. And so now we're looking at how to bring that, because it's not cost prohibitive any longer.
It is not. Actually, New York Now is implementing our artificial intelligence technology through our digital market. It's launching this October 3rd. It's built to enhance the buyer's journey, providing personalized recommendations as they search for brands and products. And based on what you're speaking of and your experience advancing your technology, I think you agree this is extremely important for brands and buyers to make meaningful connections in this manner.
I think one of the greatest things about technology too is we constantly look at what the big players are doing, the national accounts, the massive billion-dollar brands. But the one thing I think your listeners would really love and understand is that while they're able to adopt, they're not able to adapt. They're so big, they're so complex that they're not able to be as nimble as what a design house would be or a retail store can be. But that's the great thing about as a design house and as a smaller brand is when we see new technology arrive, we can adopt it immediately. And we can also shift quickly to the customer. And it's like Michael always says, Michael doesn't design but for himself. And when it comes to technology, we only bring in technology that speaks for us, not any other way around it.
Well, congratulations, because it's obviously it's a milestone.
Pleasure being with you virtually and spending this time with you. Thank you.
So before we end, Michael, I want to thank you, and I want to ask you one final question. Describe what you want the collectors of your art to feel.
Oh my goodness. Well, firstly, I love that they call themselves collectors. People come up to me when I do events and tell me, that they were collecting my art for a very long time and how they had, one of my first pieces. That always makes me really proud and happy. That the piece should give them joy, that the piece should spark conversation, and, I always say, please use them and live with them and really make them part of your everyday, because for me, if these pieces are loved and enjoyed and handed down, to future generations, then they've done what I hoped they would do, So what I would tell them is, please use them and abuse them and make them your own, and let them hopefully give joy to you and yours for a very long time.
As I know that they will. Thank you so much for sharing all this incredibly interesting history and AR information with us. You've not only given us a very beautiful inside vision of your inspiration, your process, your art, but you've shared with us an inside view of your company and its evolution. And I know that our listeners will relate to this and they'll draw from this conversation. So thank you both so very much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you for listening to the New York Now podcast. Make sure to tune in weekly for engaging and insightful conversations touching on the most relevant topics facing our community today. Visit NewYorkNow.com to learn more about our market and how you can join in on the conversation.